In 1015, the Norwegian Jarl Eirik Håkonsson issued a decree that historians long considered completely illogical. He officially outlawed the deadliest and most famous warriors of his time. We're talking about the Berserkers, whose mere appearance on the battlefield caused enemies to drop their weapons in panic. It sounds like utter madness, doesn't it? Why would a state voluntarily rid itself of its greatest tactical and military asset? But this is where it gets really interesting, because there was a truly terrifying reason behind this historical decision. For many years, we imagined these people as nothing more than madmen wielding axes while clad in enormous bearskins. Hollywood has led us to believe that they simply ate their fill of poisonous fly agaric mushrooms before battle and charged at the enemy. Modern science views these cinematic myths with mild irony and deep scholarly skepticism. Today, physiologists and historians understand that the Berserkers were a highly complex product of the harsh military evolution of the North. Their training involves physiological mechanisms that modern special forces are still studying to this day. Let's explore why the Vikings' ideal weapon ultimately became a deadly threat to its very creators. Life in 8th century Scandinavia was a grueling test of endurance for absolutely everyone. Here, you couldn't simply walk into a warm store if you suddenly ran out of food in the middle of winter. The cold, constant hunger, and endless bloody conflicts over resources dictated their own brutal rules of survival. Under such extreme conditions, society inevitably begins to produce people with a very specific, distorted psychology. Berserkers didn't appear out of nowhere. They were born into a world where weakness meant a swift and inevitable death. It was a brutal process of natural selection that chose only the most aggressive and physically resilient individuals from the tribe. The very word berserker still sparks fierce debate among linguists and armchair historians. Some researchers believe it translates as bear skin, while others insist on the variant man without a shirt. And both of these interpretations perfectly and very accurately describe the essence of the terrifying phenomenon faced by the Vikings' enemies. Imagine a large man stepping onto a frosty battlefield without any metal armor. He is clad only in the pelt of a beast he has slain, and this is not merely a fashion statement of the time. Modern military psychologists would call this a powerful tool for visually intimidating and demoralizing the enemy. The myth of magic mushrooms that gave them superhuman strength is now considered more of a beautiful yet harmful fairy tale. Toxicologists have long proven that fly agaric mushrooms cause severe nausea, loss of spatial coordination, and profuse diarrhea. You have to admit, this is far from the ideal combination of symptoms for intense hand-to-hand combat on ground slippery with blood. The true secret of their trance lay in deep psychological self-regulation and trance-like religious ecstasy. They entered a special state of combat trance, which in the ancient Norse sagas was called Berserkergang. Today, scientists compare this to a controlled episode of acute psychopathy, powerfully amplified by a massive surge of adrenaline. The training of such an elite warrior began long before he received his first real axe. From early childhood, boys were taught to endure physical pain and completely ignore the basic instinct of self-preservation. They were sent into the cold winter forest for several weeks so they could learn to survive like wild beasts. The one who returned was no longer quite a normal person, but a teenager with the warped psyche of a perfect predator. In our modern world, such troubled children would immediately be placed under strict psychiatric supervision and isolated. In the harsh era of the Vikings, they were turned into an elite special forces unit for the most desperate and bloody combat situations. The initiation rituals for these men included elements that would make a normal person today feel uneasy. A candidate had to track down and kill a large forest predator single-handedly, using only the most primitive weapons. Then he would drink the beast's fresh blood, symbolically taking its natural strength and primal ferocity for himself.
For you, old
It
friend.
sounds like a cliché plot for a cheap horror movie, but for them, it was an absolute part of everyday reality. Modern neuroscience confirms that such shock rituals are capable of completely rewiring the neural connections in the human brain. A person would literally and sincerely begin to believe that he was no longer a vulnerable mortal, but the spirit of a bear. And this is precisely the first reason why they were so terrifyingly effective in battle. The fear of death is a basic biological instinct that causes an ordinary soldier to hesitate in an attack and retreat. The Berserkers completely and permanently disabled this internal safety mechanism in their minds even before the battle began. They weren't merely unafraid of dying by enemy spears, they genuinely sought death in the heat of battle. For them, this was the only ticket to Valhalla, guaranteed by theology, for an eternal feast with the god Odin. Try defeating a man for whom your deadly threat is his primary and most desired goal in life. During active combat, their bodies exhibited physiological wonders that still astound modern doctors. Their heart rates soared to the limit, their pupils dilated to the maximum, and their pain threshold shifted to a level unattainable for the average person. In clinical medicine, this state is very similar to acute adrenaline intoxication caused by extreme stress or an accident. The only difference is that for us, it happens completely by chance, while they could induce this state at will with a snap of their fingers. I once tried running a half marathon, and my legs were begging for mercy by the halfway point. These guys could run through the forest for hours and then swing a heavy axe for hours without showing the slightest sign of fatigue. There are well-documented cases of berserkers continuing to fight fiercely, even with a severed limb or a deep stab wound. Adrenaline instantly constricted the blood vessels, simply preventing them from bleeding out in the very first minutes of battle. It sounds like something out of a comic book, but similar medical cases are sometimes documented in modern soldiers in a state of extreme stress. The brain simply blocks out signals from pain receptors, focusing the entire body on a single task. And that sole task was the total annihilation of every living thing within range of their weapons. To enemies watching from the sidelines, it looked as if they were fighting real, immortal, mythical demons. But such an incredible biochemical storm inside the body always comes at a huge and inevitable cost. After the battle ended, a so-called brutal crash set in, which could last for several long and agonizing days. The warrior would fall into a state of profound apathy. His body was completely exhausted, dehydrated, and vulnerable to infection. Modern doctors would call this a severe syndrome of total burnout of the human central nervous system. They could sleep for days on end, showing absolutely no reaction to any external stimuli or loud noises. At these moments, the once invincible killing machines became completely defenseless against any enemy, even the weakest one. That is precisely why they were almost never used as a regular army on a permanent basis during campaigns. They were a kind of living torpedo that commanders deployed only at the most critical and decisive moment of battle. The Jarls kept them by their side as elite guard dogs, personal bodyguards, and a symbol of their absolute status. Feeding and maintaining such men was incredibly expensive and a major burden on any ruler's treasury. But when the time came to break through enemy lines, these financial investments paid off in a matter of minutes of bloody combat. In the next chapter, we'll see exactly what weapons they used to wield their deadly art. If you look closely at the equipment of a typical European knight, you'll see dozens of kilograms of iron. They protected themselves with heavy chainmail, closed helmets, and enormous wooden shields edged with steel. The Berserkers looked upon this walking heap of scrap metal with outright contempt and a profound misunderstanding of the true nature of war. They sincerely believed that any heavy armor restricted movement and revealed one's inner fear of the enemy. Therefore, their primary defensive equipment was that very animalistic fury and incredible reaction speed in close combat. Modern Army Special Forces today also prefer light mobility over heavy, cumbersome armor with a high degree of protection. The Berserker's primary and most fearsome weapon in any battle was the famous two-handed Danish axe. This was nothing like the ordinary tool your grandfather uses to peacefully chop wood at the cottage on weekends. It was a gigantic battle axe with a blade up to 30 centimeters wide and a very long ash wood handle. The weight of such a specialized weapon could reach several kilograms, and swinging it required immense strength with both hands. Physicists will readily confirm. The kinetic energy of a blow from such an axe while leaping was simply monstrous and devastating. Not a single wooden shield of that era, not even the sturdiest, could withstand a direct hit from this monster. When a berserker struck from top to bottom, he would literally cleave an adult man in two down to the waist. And this is not a poetic exaggeration from ancient sagas, but a brutal medical fact proven by modern archaeologists. In mass graves from that era, skeletons are often found with clean cuts through the skull, the thick clavicle, and the rib cage. The force of the blow was such that the broad blade pierced through both a sturdy iron helmet and the dense chainmail beneath it. Imagine the devastating psychological impact this instantly had on the fallen soldier's comrades standing in formation. You realize with crystal clarity that no armor in this world can save you from the next swing of the axe. Quite often, berserkers use two types of weapons at once, fighting with both hands simultaneously with incredible dexterity. In one hand, they might hold a short sword, and in the other, a heavy, armor-piercing battle axe. Coordinating movements in such a complex fighting style requires phenomenal control over one's own body and motor skills. Modern mixed martial arts fighters spend many years learning to use both hands effectively in attack. These men did so in a state of absolute trance on a battlefield slippery with mud and blood. They literally turned into a veritable meat grinder, cutting wide, bloody swaths through enemy ranks. Swords from the Viking Age were, in general, masterpieces of blacksmithing and the most advanced metallurgical art of their time. The famous blades bearing the Ulfbert mark were made from a special crucible steel, the secret of which Europe later forgot for centuries. They had a very high carbon content, which made them incredibly strong, flexible, and astonishingly sharp. Such a sword never bent when struck hard against an enemy shield and easily sliced through thick, multi-layered fabric. Such a weapon cost a fortune, roughly equivalent to a very high-end sports car today. Therefore, the berserkers who wielded such blades were not merely ordinary warriors, but very wealthy and respected individuals. But any weapon in and of itself is simply a piece of skillfully forged cold metal. What mattered most was exactly how a berserker used that metal in brutal and merciless close combat. They deliberately and defiantly ignored all the classical rules of fencing and basic military training of the time. Their attacks were completely chaotic, unpredictable, and outwardly very reminiscent of a raging wild animal pouncing on its prey. For the disciplined and trained soldiers of regular armies, this was a true tactical and psychological nightmare. It is impossible to reliably defend against a strike if you cannot physically anticipate the trajectory of your frenzied opponent's movements. Interestingly, they very often refuse to use their traditional round wooden shields at all. Instead of passively blocking an enemy's strike, the berserker preferred to deliver his own slashing blow first. It was a strategy of absolute and uncompromising attack, where the best defense is your enemy's dead body. In modern aggressive sports, this is called total pressure, which instantly deprives the opponent of space and time to maneuver. Only in the boxing ring will the referee stop the fight if you start to lose seriously and dangerously. On the battlefield, the only judge was cold metal and the extraordinary speed of your instinctive reflexes. Special attention should be paid to the so-called ritual of biting the edge of one's own wooden shield before battle. Entering a trance-like state, Berserkers would often furiously gnaw on iron or wood, breaking their own teeth. This was done to quickly trigger an ancient primal reflex of pure, uncontrolled aggression within the body. Have you ever seen a vicious dog before a fight, furiously gnawing on a stick or a discarded toy while growling? The exact same animal's psychological and ancient physiological trigger mechanism worked flawlessly here. The enemies watched in horror as the men gnawed on the wood, foam at the mouth, and their fighting spirit evaporated without a trace. All these factors combined made them simply the ideal tactical weapon for breaking through enemy formations. Conventional military tactics of the time were based on the famous and highly reliable monolithic wall of shields. It was a dense and heavy phalanx of warriors that was extremely difficult to penetrate with a conventional head-on frontal attack. But any wall of shields is effective only as long as the men within it do not succumb to mass panic. The Berserkers functioned like modern, powerful, bunker-busting bombs, destroying this monolithic defensive wall from within. They would simply charge into the ranks at full speed, shattering the enemy's shields, bones, and will to resist. The Berserkers' weapons were a natural extension of themselves, the physical embodiment of their inner, indomitable, and savage fury. They didn't just skillfully kill their enemies. They turned every battle into a bloody and terrifying theatrical spectacle. And this brutal spectacle had one very clear goal: to sow total panic before the main clash began. After all, a frightened and broken soldier who breaks ranks and begins to flee instantly becomes an easy target. In the next chapter, we'll examine in detail exactly how the physiology of these incredible, living tanks of the early Middle Ages worked. We'll discover why modern science and medicine are so keenly interested in their remarkable survival abilities. For a long time, modern science simply could not understand how the human body is capable of withstanding such peak physical demands. When you continuously swing a heavy sword for an hour, your muscles inevitably become saturated with lactic acid. Your arms feel heavy and leaden, your breathing becomes labored, and your heart feels as if it's about to literally leap out of your chest. Muscle failure sets in quite quickly and is absolutely relentless. But the Berserkers somehow managed, in an incredible way, to completely ignore this basic physiological law of the human body. The answer to this mystery lies in the complex biochemistry of their brains and their unique, brutal endurance training methods. Today, we are well aware of the phenomenon that doctors dryly refer to by the medical term hysterical strength. This occurs when a frail mother suddenly lifts a 2-metric-ton car to save a child trapped beneath it. At this critical moment, the brain completely disables all internal safety mechanisms that protect our ligaments and muscles from tearing. A colossal amount of energy, hidden in the deepest reserves of our bodies for the most extreme of situations, is released. The Berserkers knew how to activate this forbidden, hysterical strength mode at will before every major battle. They literally hacked into their body's factory settings, gaining direct access to hidden physical resources. The main high-octane fuel for this superpower was an incredible cocktail of hormones triggered by wild stress and aggression. Adrenaline, norepinephrine, and endorphins were released into the bloodstream in such massive doses that they would easily kill a weak person. This organic mixture worked better than any modern synthetic combat stimulant or doping substance strictly banned in sports. Endorphins acted as a powerful natural analgesic, completely blocking the transmission of pain signals to the brain. That is precisely why they could completely ignore severe lacerations and continue their furious attack. My knees start to ache and throb at the mere thought of running with a heavy backpack over rough terrain. But they regularly undertook long, forced marches through the forests, immediately followed by intense hand-to-hand combat. Their cardiovascular systems had been perfectly adapted to extreme peak exertion from their earliest, harsh childhood. Regular training in the bitter cold made their blood vessels incredibly elastic and resistant to sudden spasms. Modern enthusiasts of trendy winter swimming try to achieve a similar effect by taking morning dips in an icy hole in the ice during the winter. But for the Vikings, this wasn't a trendy, healthy lifestyle for a blog. It was a harsh daily routine of survival. Diet also played a huge and fundamental role in shaping this incredible physical killing machine. Their daily diet consisted mainly of high-quality animal protein and huge amounts of saturated animal fats. Meat, fatty fish, and dairy products provided the very energy that was broken down slowly and as evenly as possible. No fast carbs or sugary energy bars, just heavy, nutritious fuel for their grueling daily work. Modern nutritionists call this the keto diet and successfully sell trendy courses for a lot of money online. The Vikings practiced this approach 1,000 years ago simply because they had no other food available. An interesting little-known fact is that in a state of battle trance, not only did the body change, but so did their vision. The tunnel vision effect is a specific state in which peripheral vision narrows, focusing solely on a single target. This is an entirely natural reaction of any large predator before making the decisive pounce on its chosen prey. For a berserker, the entire surrounding world simply vanished, leaving only the enemy in focus, one who had to be destroyed immediately. This made them incredibly precise in attack, but, unfortunately, created a serious tactical vulnerability on the flanks. However, approaching them from the side was nearly impossible due to the tremendous speed of their chaotic movements across the battlefield. Their breathing in close combat was also radically different from that of an ordinary, frightened person. The wild howls and growls they constantly emitted had not only a terrifying acoustic effect, but also a powerful psychological one. It was an ancient and proven technique of forced breathing that helped rapidly saturate their thick blood with oxygen. At the same time, this loud cry effectively relieved the psychological constriction in the chest and relaxed the spasmed muscles of the diaphragm. Today, professional weightlifters shout loudly before lifting a record-breaking weight for exactly the same physiological reason. Ancient warriors intuitively knew what is now taught for years in physical education and sports academies. The thermoregulatory abilities of these northern peoples go far beyond our modern understanding of physiological comfort. They could stand motionless for hours in the freezing cold, wearing only light animal skins, without feeling any danger of hypothermia. In a state of battle trance, their overall body temperature could rise several critical degrees above normal. Thick steam literally rose from them, adding even more demonic and supernatural terror to their ferocious appearance. Imagine a huge man running toward you with an axe, thick white smoke rising from his body. Modern military thermal imagers would show them as very bright, glowing spots against the cold northern backdrop. But their most terrifying physiological trait was the incredible speed at which their blood clotted when wounded. Under normal conditions, an average person can lose consciousness from losing a liter of blood in just a few minutes. In Berserkers, profuse bleeding from peripheral wounds stopped abnormally quickly due to a powerful shock-induced spasm of the capillaries. The body instantly redirected all remaining blood to vital organs and major working muscle groups. This is a powerful defense mechanism that today can be observed only in certain species of large wild animals. Nature made them ideal fighting machines, capable of functioning even after sustaining multiple critical injuries. To sum up this incredible physiology, we can say that these were people constantly pushing the limits of what biology allows. Through sheer willpower, they forced their bodies to do things that seem to us today like a blatant violation of the laws of physics. But in this world, any magic or superpower always comes at a very high price. The resources of such an overworked organism were depleted incredibly quickly, and many of them simply did not live to see a peaceful old age. In the next chapter, we'll move from dry physiology to tactics and take a look at these monsters in action. You'll learn exactly how they crushed massive armies that vastly outnumbered them. War in the early Middle Ages was a strictly organized affair, calculated almost mathematically down to the smallest detail. Two lines of soldiers would slowly converge on the battlefield, raise their shields, and begin methodically thrusting their spears at one another. In such a meat grinder, victory went to whoever could maintain formation the longest and resist the mounting mass panic. It was very much like a brutal game of tug-of-war, where every meter was won at the cost of dozens of human lives. And then, the Berserkers would appear on the field, completely and irrevocably shattering this familiar and tedious chess game. They instantly transformed an organized battle into a bloody, unpredictable bloodbath where none of the usual rules applied. Their main tactical objective in any battle was to act as a living, penetrating wedge. The Jarls positioned them at the very center of their battle formation, or on the flanks to create local numerical superiority. When a loud signal to attack was given, they would charge forward with a roar, leaving the main line of Vikings far behind. This seems like a downright suicidal maneuver, since they found themselves face to face with an entire enemy army. But it was precisely in this mad and terrifying audacity that their main and most fearsome tactical secret lay. They took the first, most devastating blow upon themselves, diverting the enemy's attention from the main advancing forces. The collision of a charging berserker with a wall of shields was very much like a speeding truck crashing into a flimsy wooden fence. They made no attempt whatsoever to carefully seek out gaps in the defense. They simply tore it down with brute kinetic force. A powerful running leap, a downward swing of a heavy axe, and suddenly, a huge hole appeared in the monolithic formation. Other Scandinavian warriors immediately rushed into this gaping hole, widening the breach and sowing panic among the defenders. Modern generals use tank wedges to breach fortified defensive lines, according to exactly the same principle. Only 1,000 years ago, the role of heavy armored tanks was played by living men clad in blood-stained animal skins. Their ability to completely ignore any defensive maneuvers by the enemy inspired a special, primal terror. If an ordinary, level-headed soldier saw a spear flying toward him, he would instinctively raise his shield or dodge to the side. A berserker could simply knock the flying spear away with his bare hands, or take a glancing blow to the shoulder without slowing down. For a terrified enemy, this completely shattered all logical patterns of conducting proper and fair hand-to-hand combat. How could one possibly defeat a man who made no attempt to defend his own life against a direct attack? This psychological tactic worked flawlessly against both ordinary militiamen and well-trained regular troops. During frequent naval battles, their tactical role was even more specific and incredibly dangerous. Ships were firmly hooked together with boarding hooks, forming a gigantic floating wooden platform for a bloody massacre. The Berserkers were always the first to leap onto the enemy deck to clear a foothold for the rest of the crew to land safely. In the narrow, slippery confines of the ship, where maneuvering was impossible, their savage fury became an absolute weapon of mass destruction. They simply hurled terrified enemies overboard, swinging their axes left and right amid the cramped wooden deck. Surviving an encounter with them in such a confined space was practically an impossible task for an ordinary sailor. Interestingly, they very often operated in small groups or close-knit combat brotherhoods consisting of exactly 12 men. The number 12 holds a deep, sacred, and highly significant religious symbolic meaning in ancient Norse mythology. Such a group was capable of single-handedly annihilating an entire enemy detachment 5 times their size. They intuitively covered each other's backs, moving through the thick of battle as a single, many-armed, and deadly organism. Modern Army Special Forces also prefer to operate in small, well-coordinated tactical units to carry out the most complex combat missions. The Romans once relied on discipline, while these men relied on primal chaos and synchronized animalistic aggression. Their tactics often included elements of what the military today would call powerful psychological operations. Before an attack, they might bite their shields with foam at the mouth, howl loudly like wolves, and strike their weapons against trees. This bestial concert echoed loudly across the battlefield, making the enemy's blood run cold. Many enemies, in a panic, would drop their weapons and flee even before the first real sword blow was struck. Defeating an army that has already lost the battle in its own mind is a sign of true tactical genius. Why waste precious forces on killing when the enemy, in terror, clears the path to victory for you? However, this very tactic made them utterly unsuitable for complex defensive maneuvers or prolonged positional sieges. You cannot simply order a man in a state of Berserker gang to stand still and hold a disciplined defense. Their burning instincts demanded an immediate advance, straight into the enemy's spears and ranks of bristling shields. Therefore, wise commanders kept them in deep reserve until the very moment when a decisive offensive was needed. Releasing them prematurely was tantamount to throwing a combat grenade at one's own feet in a cramped trench. A weapon of such destructive power requires very precise and perfectly timed tactical deployment on the battlefield. It also happened that blind fury played a very cruel and sometimes tragic trick on them. Carried away by a bloody pursuit of the retreating enemy, they could become separated from their main forces by a dangerous distance. Enemy cavalry or skilled archers could easily destroy a lone infantryman left without the support of his comrades. Chaos tactics work perfectly for a breakthrough, but they are utterly powerless against well-organized flank ambushes. Over time, European armies learned to deal with them effectively, using crossbows and heavily armored cavalry. But until that turning point, the Berserkers remained the invincible kings of the battlefield for 3 long centuries. The true greatness of their tactics lay in their ability to turn their greatest weaknesses into their deadliest weapons. They compensated for their complete lack of armor with speed and their numerical inferiority with extreme brutality and psychological pressure on the enemy. It was a perfect, yet terrifying symbiosis of animal instinct and human intellect aimed at the destruction of their own kind. But sooner or later, any uncontrolled chaos begins to devour those who tried to bring it under their control. In the next chapter, we'll learn why even the toughest Vikings began to seriously fear their own heroes. After all, what works perfectly in war becomes a real disaster in the calm, peaceful life of society. When any war finally ends, the ordinary soldier takes off his heavy armor, hangs his sword on the wall, and embraces his wife. He returns to peaceful life with a sense of relief, sows wheat, repairs a leaky roof, and drinks ale in the evenings. For the ancient Greeks, it was simple. You went on a campaign, fought, returned as a hero, and carried on living peacefully. But for a true berserker, the war never truly ended. It was merely put on hold for a brief and frustrating pause. A psyche warped by years of bloody carnage and a trance-like state simply could not switch back to a peaceful state so easily. And this is when Scandinavian society began to face very serious internal problems with these elite veterans. Modern clinical psychiatry calls this post-traumatic stress disorder in its most severe and uncontrollable form. A warrior, accustomed his entire life to solving any problem with a swing of his axe, could not adapt to the rules of ordinary peacetime society. Any sidelong glance or carelessly thrown remark in a tavern could trigger a sudden outburst of uncontrollable, animalistic aggression. They began maiming and killing their own neighbors simply because their brains interpreted any unusual situation as a threat. Imagine a man with a loaded machine gun, his finger constantly trembling nervously on the trigger. Living next to such a neighbor is like sleeping on a powder keg with a lit match. The old sagas contain countless references to how they would show up at other people's weddings uninvited. They could simply declare brazenly that they were taking all of the host's property, including his wife and young daughters. And if anyone tried to object, an immediate challenge to a holmgang, a traditional Scandinavian judicial duel with a fatal outcome, would follow. Naturally, no ordinary peasant or artisan stood the slightest chance of surviving a battle against a professional fighting machine. The Berserkers began actively exploiting the legal judicial system for outright racketeering and blatant, legalized plundering of their own tribesmen. From valiant defenders of the tribe, they gradually turned into a social cancer that slowly eroded the foundations of society. The Jarls and Konungs, who had once taken such pride in their elite warriors, now had absolutely no idea what to do with them. Keeping them at court in peacetime was incredibly dangerous, even for the ruler himself and his inner circle. Their fleeting loyalty was based solely on plunder and the opportunity to constantly kill someone for the sake of glory and wealth. When the distant campaigns ended, their seething inner energy demanded an outlet, and they turned their aggression inward. It was the classic problem of Dr. Frankenstein, who looks on in horror at the monster he created, now out of control. Wealthy landowners suffered particularly badly, as these uncontrollable veterans viewed them as walking wallets for personal enrichment. In Iceland, where there was no strong, centralized authority, this social problem reached truly catastrophic proportions. Entire farms were wiped out simply because a local bond refused to hand over his best horse to a passing, wandering berserker.
We must stay strong.
A society that had been based for centuries on the law of the strongest suddenly realized that the greatest force was no longer under its control. It was imperative to find a legal or practical solution to the problem before these people completely destroyed the economy. After all, a dead peasant pays no taxes and grows no grain to sustain the Konung's massive standing army. Another crucial factor was the radical shift in the religious paradigm, which began to actively penetrate the cold northern lands. Christianity, with its strict commandments regarding love for one's neighbor, was categorically incompatible with the cult of bloody, bear-like fury. The new priests viewed these savage warriors not as heroes, but as people possessed by actual demons. To the emerging church, they were a relic of a dark pagan past that had to be completely eradicated from people's minds. A powerful ideological overhaul of the entire society was taking place, in which there was simply no room left for bloody trance rituals. Suddenly, being a berserker was no longer honorable or cool, but deeply shameful and even deadly dangerous. Moreover, by the 11th century, military technology had advanced significantly, forever changing the rules of the game. Well-organized professional armies emerged, where strict, iron discipline was valued over personal heroism and blind fury. The English and the Franks learned to maintain tight formation, using closed ranks of crossbowmen and heavy cavalry in steel armor. A lone warrior with an axe, even if utterly fearless, became an easy target for a coordinated volley from a dozen crossbows. The romance of bearskins was shattered to pieces by the pragmatism of cold steel and mathematical calculation on the new European battlefield. The days of the lone hero were over, giving way to the faceless but terrifyingly effective military machine of the late Middle Ages. Pragmatic rulers needed predictable soldiers who would unquestioningly follow orders rather than fall into uncontrollable ecstasy. It is physically impossible to command an army in a trance. It cannot be stopped in time or redirected to another flank. When a Konung gives the order to retreat, he expects the troops to withdraw in an orderly manner to new, prepared defensive positions. The Berserkers, however, knew nothing of the word retreat and continued to attack until every last one of them had perished. Such senseless waste of human resources became an unaffordable luxury for rulers striving for stable state centralization. As a result, Viking society made the difficult but absolutely inevitable decision to surgically intervene in its own culture. They resolved to amputate this infected part of their traditions in order to survive in a new world that was changing before their very eyes. Harsh laws began to be enacted, equating the state of battle trance with a serious state crime against society. Those who attempted to bite their shields or howl like wolves in public were declared outlaws and mercilessly killed on the spot. Thus, the perfect superweapon of antiquity was officially scrapped by its own brilliant creators as completely obsolete. It was an inglorious end to an entire era when personal valor and primal fury decided the outcome of great battles. They were replaced by the tedious but devilishly effective bureaucracy of war, with its regulations, taxes, and constant logistics. In the next chapter, we will examine in detail exactly how this legislative ban came about and what its consequences were for the veterans. We will see how the celebrated heroes of ancient sagas were turned into pitiful outcasts, against whom a full-scale hunt was declared. That very decree issued by the Norwegian Jarl Eirik Håkonsson in 1015 became the first official nail in the lid of this historical coffin. The document stated very simply and without unnecessary legal sentiment: any person who fell into a berserk state was subject to immediate expulsion. In practice, this meant the loss of all property rights and the status of a so-called man of the forest, whom anyone could kill with impunity. No fair trial, no discussion of past merits to the fatherland, or valiant scars earned on distant campaigns. The state simply struck them from the list of citizens, making them legal prey for anyone wishing to settle old scores. Iceland, which had long been their last safe haven, soon adopted this harsh legal trend as well. The famous Icelandic law code, the Grey Goose, clearly and unambiguously stipulated punishment for bouts of uncontrollable rage on the island. If a person publicly displayed symptoms of Berserker gang, they faced the confiscation of all their acquired property and exile for a period of 3 years. For people accustomed to being the absolute masters of their own lives, this was a humiliating and utterly unbearable blow to their pride. Many of them attempted to resist the new order by force, leading to a series of brutal and bloody internal crackdowns. The Konungs dispatched entire well-armed detachments of their professional bodyguards en masse to destroy the pockets of resistance led by former heroes. In these punitive state expeditions, there was no longer any place for honorable one-on-one duels, as had been the custom in the past. The homes of rebellious veterans were simply quietly surrounded at night and burned to the ground along with all their inhabitants, leaving them not a single chance of escape. It was incredibly cruel, but from the standpoint of national security, it was the only effective method of solving the problem. It is impossible to negotiate with a predator accustomed to feeding on your neighbors. It can only be permanently and physically eliminated. It is interesting to observe how quickly society's attitude toward its former heroes changed in the texts of later historical sagas. While in early works they were described as godlike warriors who saved armies from defeat, the tone later shifted dramatically. Now, in the sagas, they appear exclusively as the main villains, hideous, stupid, and cruel bandits who terrorize peaceful peasants. The authors deliberately strip them of their romantic aura, transforming them into grotesque monsters that a new, noble Christian hero must defeat. The information war against the Berserkers was waged just as ruthlessly and purposefully as the actual military operations aimed at their annihilation. What then became of those who nevertheless managed to survive these new, harsh conditions of state persecution? Many of them entered the service of the Byzantine emperors, joining the ranks of the famous Varangian Guard in distant Constantinople. There, their exotic appearance and incredible combat skills were still valued as highly as pure gold. Far from their homeland, they could legally put their talents to use in suppressing uprisings and protecting the most powerful monarch. Byzantium became for them a sort of prestigious foreign legion, a refuge for all the restless and aggressive souls of the north. Others went to work as mercenaries in the fragmented lands of Rus, where constant feuds among the princes ensured a steady demand for violence. There, no one asked unnecessary questions about your mental health as long as you could smash an enemy warrior's skull. But even there, their time was inexorably coming to an end as the lands united and strong, centralized states were formed. Gradually, they dissolved into the mass of ordinary mercenaries, losing their unique rituals and secrets for entering a trance. Evolution ruthlessly pruned away that branch, which no longer helped the species survive in the changed historical and social conditions. Today, we can only study with great wonder the scraps of information left to us by archaeologists and medieval chroniclers. It is difficult for us to fully comprehend what it is like to stand in formation and see a roaring man-bear charging toward you. We live in a comfortable world where our greatest fears revolve around unpaid bills or a poor internet connection. But 1,000 years ago, ordinary people faced the physical embodiment of pure, uncontrolled chaos, clutching a heavy axe in its hands. And to be honest, I'm very glad that this chapter of human history has been consigned forever to the dark past. Modern military analysts sometimes compare the effect of a berserker attack to the use of the world's first chemical weapon. It was a breakthrough tactic that instilled such primal terror that the enemy instantly lost the will to resist. But, like chemical weapons, it proved too unpredictable and dangerous for those who tried to use it. The outcome was entirely logical. Society agreed to abandon this tool for the sake of its own survival and sanity. The rules of war had changed irrevocably, and under these new rules, there was no longer any place for Odin's magic or bear skins. The disappearance of these warriors became a symbol of Europe's final transition from the age of barbarism to the age of civilized and pragmatic states. Kings no longer needed mad fanatics. They needed engineers, artillerymen, and disciplined, obedient taxpayers. Brute strength and blind fury gave way to the power of gunpowder, complex tactics, and grandiose stone fortifications. And while this may not sound as romantic as the ancient sagas, it allowed humanity to take a step forward in its development. We traded the wild, natural magic of blood for the dull but very reliable safety of stone walls and strict laws. The Berserkers have faded into oblivion, but their image has been forever imprinted in the cultural code of our modern global civilization. They continue to live on in the pages of fantasy novels, in video games, and on the giant screens of Hollywood historical blockbusters. We still marvel at this unbridled power while sitting in the safe, warm seats of movie theaters with popcorn in hand. But real history teaches us one very important lesson. An absolute weapon always turns against its own creator. In conclusion, we will draw a final summary of this remarkable historical phenomenon and its place in our shared history. The story of the Berserkers is not just a thrilling tale about brutal men with axes from a distant, cold past. It is a profound lesson in how human society adapts, creates tools for survival, and then destroys them itself. The Vikings invented the perfect machine for close combat by defying the very physiology and psychology of ordinary mortals. They harnessed fear and rage to their advantage, turning them into a tactical edge on the battlefield. But they forgot that nature cannot be deceived forever, and that flirting with madness always comes at a fatal price. Today, science confirms what the ancient Scandinavians knew intuitively. The human body's resources are truly vast and limitless. We are capable of enduring immense pain, ignoring fatigue, and accomplishing the impossible in moments of extreme physical and emotional stress. But the price of such overexertion is a shattered psyche, a burned-out nervous system, and a complete inability to live a normal life. The laws of evolution are harsh, but fair. It is not the strongest or the fiercest who survive, but those who know how to adapt in time. The age of the Berserkers has ended, but their legend remains an eternal reminder of the dark, primal force slumbering within each of us.